Today I'm going to be talking about verse 7 of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. But I think one thing I haven't talked about much recently is about the connection between the verses. So the core teachings of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu really begin from verse 4. So I'm going to go back to verse 4 and explain the continuity between the verses. What Bhagavan said in verse 4 was, ēṛivum taṉṇāyin ulahu paramatran. If oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. ēṛivum taṉṇāl, if oneself is not a form, uvatrin uruvate kan urudul yavan. Who can see their forms? Evan. How? That means when we rise as ego, we take ourselves as a form, the form of a body, and because we experience ourselves as a form, we see the world and God as forms. But as Bhagavan says, if we are not a form, who can see their forms as and how? That is, when we don't rise as ego, as in sleep, we're not aware of any forms. And here what Bhagavan means by form is any kind of phenomena, anything that is in any way distinguishable from any other thing. So he's not just talking about physical forms, he's talking about mental forms. So every thought, every emotion, every like, dislike, any phenomenon of any kind whatsoever is a form. That is, anything that has distinguishing features is a form. So our real nature is devoid of form. But when we rise as ego, we take ourselves to be the form of a body. A body here, as Bhagavan clarifies in the next verse, means a form of 5 sheaves. So he's not just talking about the physical body, he's talking about all the 5 sheaves. So it includes the mind and all the various aspects of the mind. So when we rise as ego, we take ourselves to be a form, hence we see the world and God likewise. If we didn't rise as ego, we wouldn't experience ourselves as a form, and hence who would be there to see their forms and how? So forms appear only in the view of ego. And the forms appear in view of ego because ego first mistakes itself to be a form, first attaches itself to a form of a body, and then it sees other forms. It takes the form of a body to be itself. So by saying this, Bhagavan is establishing a principle, which he expresses as in the form of a rhetorical question in the next sentence. He says, can the seen be otherwise than the eye? What that means is the nature of what is seen cannot be different to the nature of what sees it. Here, eye means, the Tamil word is kan. That means it's referring to a physical, the physical organ of sight is eye. But here he's using this word eye in a metaphorical sense to mean what knows or what is aware. So if what is aware is a form, then what it knows will be forms. If it's formless, what it knows will be formless. And it is only forms that divide one thing from another. So in a state of formlessness, there are no differences, no divisions. It's a state of oneness. So in a state of oneness, there are no forms. In a state of multiplicity, there are forms. It's only forms that give rise to the appearance of multiplicity. So it's only when we take ourselves to be the form of a body consisting of 5 sheaves, but we see the forms of the world. And then he concludes this verse by saying, kan adutan antamila kan. That means the I is oneself, the infinite I. When he says it, the word he uses for infinite is antam ilah. Antam means end or limit. So antam ilah means without limit. So whatever has no limit is formless. Whatever all forms have limits, because that is how we distinguish one form from another. So all forms are limited. That which is formless has no limits. So what he implies is our real nature is the infinite awareness, the pure awareness, that is one infinite whole, indivisible, because there's no separation. It's not separate from anything else, and there are no divisions within it. So that is our real nature. So what Bhagavan establishes in this first verse is that all forms seem to exist only when we mistake ourselves to be a form. In other words, when we rise as ego. So it is only in the view of ourselves as ego, as ego, we always experience ourselves as I am this body, a form of 5 sheaths. So we consequently, as ego, we always see forms. We cannot know formlessness so long as we know ourselves as a form. When we don't know ourselves as a form, there's no one to see any form. So the implication here is that all forms exist only, or all forms seem to exist only in the view of ego. Then in the next verse, he clarifies what is the form he's referring to. That is the form that we take to be ourselves is a body. But we never experience, in this context, body doesn't just refer to the physical form of the body, because whenever we experience ourselves as a body, it's always a living body. So the body and the life are the first 2 sheaths. That is, the physical form of the body is the first sheath, the annamaya kosha. The life, the prana, the breath, and all the physiological functions that distinguish a living body from a dead body, that is the pranamaya kosha. But we also never experience a sleeping body as I. It's always a body that seems to be awake. Even in dream, the body we're experiencing as I seems to be awake. So in a body that is awake, or in dream, waking and dream actually are the same according to Bhagavan. Not only is there the body, and that is the physical form of the body and the life animating it, there's also functioning within it mind, intellect, and will. Mind in this context means the grosser functions of the mind. Perceptions, memories, thoughts, feelings, emotions, and so on. Intellect is a subtler form of the mind, that is the judging and discriminating and reasoning faculty of the mind. That ability to distinguish one thing from another, that is the intellect. And the subtlest of all the 5 sheaths is the will. The will is what is called Anandamaya Kosha. It is called the Anandamaya Kosha because our will is always, that is the basis of will is our basic desire for happiness. Happiness is our real nature, but when we rise as ego, we seem to separate ourselves from our real nature. So as ego, we are always seeking happiness. So because our liking to experience happiness is the will. And the will consists of vasanas, which are there are inclinations, which are the seeds that give rise to likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, etc., the grosser form of the will. So all these 5 we experience together. We never experience this gross body, this physical body, without experiencing the other 4. And likewise, we never experience the mind without experiencing a body. So these 5 are one package. So since the form that we take to be I is a body, Bhagavan discusses this form here. He says, Udal Pancha Kosa Uru. The body is a form composed of 5 sheaths. So whenever Bhagavan talks about ego being the false awareness, I am this body, what he means by body is not just the physical body, he's referring to all the 5 sheaths. So the body is a form of 5 sheaths. Udal Pancha Kosa Uru. Adalal udal ēṇum sollil, aindum udal ēṇum sollil aḍuṅgum. Therefore, all 5 are included in the term body. When we talk about body, we are referring to all these five. And then he says in the next sentence, uḍalandri ulahum undo ulahum. Without or besides the body, is there a world? That is, when we don't experience ourselves as a body, is there any such thing as the world? And then in the next sentence, he says, udittu ulahate kanda ularo kararu. That means leaving the body or without the body. Is there anyone who has seen a world? Say or tell me. So these two rhetorical questions seem to be very similar. The first one, he says, without a body, is there a world? And in the second one, he says, leaving the body, is there anyone who has seen a world? This seems to be the same. Superficially, these two questions seem to be asking the same thing, but there is a subtle difference between them. When he says, without a body, is there a world? He's there talking about existence. Does a world exist if there's no body? But in the second sentence, leaving the body, is there anyone who has seen the world? There he's talking about knowing the world. So one is to put it in philosophical terms, the first question is an ontological, though it's expressed as a rhetorical question, the implication is an ontological one. There is no world other than without a body. The second one is an epistemic statement. Without the body, no one has seen the world. The reason Bhagavan brings both of these together is because, according to Bhagavan, the world doesn't exist independent of our perception of it. So why do we say the world exists, or why do we believe the world exists? Because we see the world, because we perceive the world. So we have no reason to suppose that any such thing as a world exists, except that we happen to perceive it. So the existence of the world and the perception of the world are one and the same thing, because the world doesn't actually exist. It only seems to exist. And something can't seem to exist without seeming to exist in the view of some other thing. So it's in the view of ego that the world seems to exist. So the existence of the world and and our perception of the world are one and the same thing. This is what is called drishti shrishti bhada. So here he's in the first verse, he says, in verse 4, he says, has anyone seen a world without a body? Here he's saying the same, in the first verse he says, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. In other words, the form of the world appears only in the form of that which takes itself to be a form, namely ego. Here he's saying the same thing, but in a slightly different way. And then in the 6th verse, which we talked about last time, he says, ulahu ayn pullangul uru. The world is a form of 5 sense impressions, or sense objects. That is, sense impressions. Pullangul here implies sense impressions. That is, the 5 kinds of sense impression are sights, sounds, tastes, smells, and tactile sensations. If you remove these 5, where is there any world? So he says, ulahu ayn pullangul uru. The world is a form of 5 sense impressions. Thereundu, not anything else. So in other words, what he's implying here, the world is nothing. There's no world independent of our perception of it. What we call the world is simply a series of sense impressions. And sense impressions are mental impressions, because when we say, I see it, that is the impression, though it takes the form of a sense impression, a sight, a sound, or whatever, all of these are mental impressions. So that's the underlying implication that we have to understand. So the world is a form of 5 sense impressions, not anything else. Then he goes on to say, I'm pullan, I'm poriku pullanam. Those 5 sense impressions are impressions to the 5 sense organs. Ulahaṟivu manam oṉḍṛu, I'm porivayal oṇḍidutal, manate andri ulahu undo. Aṛi. That means since the mind alone perceives the world by way of the 5 sense organs, is there a world besides the mind? So the implication of this verse is the world is nothing but 5 kinds of sense impressions. And these 5 kinds of sense impressions are known by whom? They're known only by the mind. So the world is nothing but a series of mental impressions, and the implication. So is there a world besides the mind? That is, without someone to see it, does any world exist? We all know that while we're dreaming, the dream world seems to exist. And it seems we assume while dreaming, but the world exists, but we see in the dream exists independent of our perception of it. But as soon as we wake up, we recognize that that world that we saw in a dream was just a mental fabrication, and it had no existence independent of our perception of it. So what Bhagavan is saying in this verse is just like the world in a dream has no existence independent of our perception of it, this world has no existence independent of our perception of it. The world seems to exist only in the mind. It's only in the mind, to the mind, by the mind, but the world seems to exist. So all these 3 verses, verse 4, verse 5, and verse 6, they're all very closely interrelated. They're all ultimately implying the same thing. But Bhagavan is saying it in different ways. That is, he's making a very strong case here, presenting it from different perspectives, but essentially he's saying the same thing in all these verses. So now we come to the verse I'm to talk about today, which is a continuation of the same idea. But whereas in the previous verse, he said, is there a world without the mind or besides the mind? In verse 7, he doesn't refer to the mind explicitly, but he does implicitly. That is that in the first 2 words in verse 7 are ulahu and aṟivu. Ulahu means world. Aṟivu means awareness. But the awareness he's talking about here is the mind. That it is the mind that is aware of the world. The awareness, but because what he says in this sentence is ulahu aṟivum oṉṭṛāy udittu oḍuṅgum ēṇum. Though the world and awareness arise and subside as one or simultaneously, ulahu aṟivu-taṉṇāl oḻirum. The world shines only by the mind, only by awareness. Since he talks about this awareness as rising and subsiding, it's obviously not the real awareness. It is the awareness called mind. That is, mind is not the pure awareness. Pure awareness knows nothing other than itself. The mind is the adjunct mixed awareness, I am this body. And it's only in the view of this awareness that is aware of itself as I am this body, but the world seems to exist. So what he's referring to here as aṟivu, in this context, it is the mind or ego that he's referring to. That is, when he said, for example, in the previous verse, that is there, since the mind alone, or one thing, the mind, perceives the world by way of the 5 sense organs, is there a world besides the mind? When he said the mind perceives, what he means there by the mind is ego. That is, the term mind, we need to understand from the context the sense in which it's being used, because we often use the term mind to refer to the totality of all thoughts. But other thoughts do not know anything. The only thought that knows anything is the first thought I, that is ego. So the mind we can say consists of two elements, the knowing element and the known element. So what is known, the objects, all other thoughts are objects known. They're known by whom? Only by the first thought I, namely ego. So when Bhagavan talks about the world, the mind perceiving the world, what he means there by mind is ego. So likewise, what he's referring to here as aṟivu is the mind in the sense of ego, the perceiving of the awareness that knows the world. That's why he says, since though the world and awareness, meaning ego, we get now I'll just replace it by ego. Though the world and ego rise and subside simultaneously, the world shines only by the ego. What does he mean by saying that it shines by? Shines means to be known. So without ego, there would be nothing to know the world. So it's only in the view of ego that the world seems to exist. So it's only by that awareness that knows the world, in other words, by ego, but the world seems to shine. Shine here means it is known. And whatever shines seems to exist. But it doesn't, that the world doesn't actually exist, as Bhagavan says. It doesn't exist independent of the mind, as he said in the previous verse. But so long as we rise as ego, take ourselves to be a body, the world seems to exist as a multitude of forms. So as I say, all these four verses, 4, 5, 6, 7, Bhagavan is saying essentially the same thing, but from different angles. So in this verse 7, the first sentence he says, though the world and the awareness that knows the world, in other words, ego, arise and subside simultaneously, it is by the awareness that knows it, in other words, ego, that the world shines. And then in the next sentence, this is a very important sentence, he says, ulahu aṟivu tōṉḍṛimaṟai iḍaṉ-āy, tōṉḍṛimaṟaiyaду oḻirum, pūṉḍṛamā aḳdē poruḻ. What this means is, only that which shines without appearing or disappearing as the place or the base for the appearing and disappearing of the world and awareness. Awareness there means ego, mind, is the substance, which is the whole. This requires a little bit of explanation. That is, if we slightly expand it, only that which shines without appearing and disappearing as the iḍaṉ. Iḍaṉ here means the place or the space or the expanse or the location or site or ground. So that is what is the foundation? What is the space in which everything appears, and what is the ground on which it all stands? It's only this what Bhagavan refers to here as poruḻ. So only that which shines without appearing or disappearing as the place or the ground or the space for the appearing and disappearing of the world and that awareness that knows the world, in other words, ego, is poruḻ. Poruḻ is a very important word in Tamil, particularly in Bhagavan's teaching. It has a range of meanings. Many of the meanings are almost identical to the meanings of vastu in Sanskrit. In a philosophical context, poruḻ or vastu means the substance, what actually exists. For example, in the one analogy Bhagavan sometimes uses is of gold and gold ornaments. The vastu is the gold. The ornaments are just forms, because the ornaments have no existence independent of the gold. If you take away the gold, then there's no ring, no bangle, no tiara or crown or necklace or whatever it is. That is, the gold may appear in many different forms, but those forms have no independent existence. It is only because gold appears in those forms that we say those forms exist. But the actual substance is the gold. That's, of course, just an analogy. But when we apply this to the, to what this is analogous to, what actually exists is only pure awareness. That is Satchidananda, pure being, pure awareness, pure happiness, pure love. That is what actually exists. That's our real nature. That is what we actually are. That is the substance that appears as all this. So the ultimate substance, the one thing that actually exists is, or the reality, we can say, that is poruḻ. So, as I say, poruḻ has a range of meanings. Its principal meaning in a philosophical context is the same as vastu in Sanskrit, namely the one real substance, the reality, or the only thing that actually exists. And this is the sense in which Bhagavan generally uses this word. But like vastu, it's also used to mean a thing, anything, an object, an entity, or it also can mean property or wealth. If you say someone has lots of poruḻ, that means he's got lots of wealth. It can also mean the subject matter of if you write an essay about something, but the subject matter of that essay, that is the poruḻ. And also, unlike vastu, poruḻ in Tamil also means the meaning of a word, the thing that a word refers to. So, for example, in verse 21 of Upadesha, Bhagavan talks about nānenam sat poruḻ, the substance of the word I. What is that substance? It's the one thing that alone remains when ego dies. That is the true substance of the word I. And in verse 13 of aksharam, he describes Aruṇāchala as oṅkāra poruḻ. So what did the word oṅkāra refer to? That is Aruṇāchala. So the referent of a word is its substance, what is actually the thing that is actually there. In Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, when Bhagavan uses the word poruḻ, he is generally talking about he's generally talking about the one thing that actually exists. Certainly in this case he is. That is the one that is when you see a snake, when you see a rope and mistake it to be a snake, the poruḻ is the rope. The snake is a mere appearance. So what lies behind the appearance of all this multiplicity, that's in this verse, he's talking about the world and awareness. The world is object, the awareness that knows the world is subject. So what is the reality behind the appearance of both subject and object? That is poruḻ. That is what he's saying here. There is one verse in Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu where Bhagavan uses poruḻ in the ordinary sense of a thing. That is, I think, in verse 28, if I remember correctly. I think it's verse 28. Yes, in verse 28, he says, he uses an analogy. Nēril virunda poruļ kāna vendi muru hudal pole. What that means is like sinking, wanting to see something that has fallen in water. So there, poruḻ just means an object. It could be anything. You could have dropped your mobile phone in the water, or you could have dropped your ring in the water. If you've dropped something in the water and you go to get it, just like that, there poruḻ is just talking about an object. But that's the only place in which in Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, where Bhagavan uses the word poruḻ in that ordinary sense, but he uses the word poruḻ in many other verses, and wherever else he uses it, he's talking about the one thing that actually exists. So that's what the sense in which he's using the word poruḻ here. So poruḻ means the vastu, the one thing that actually exists, the thing that lies behind all the appearances. So here we can say, we can also just translate poruḻ as the reality or the real substance. So what is that reality or real substance? He defines in this sentence: only that which shines without ever appearing or disappearing. When he says it shines without appearing or disappearing, that means it shines eternally. And shines means it is known. So what is the one thing that shines without appearing or disappearing? The one thing that we always know? It is our fundamental awareness, I am, our awareness of our own existence. That is, whatever else may appear or disappear, the one thing that always, that is always shines, in other words, is always known, always exists and always shines, is our own existence, I am. That is our fundamental awareness. In waking and dream, the ego and world appear. In sleep, they disappear. But both when they appear and when they disappear, the one thing that always shines is that fundamental awareness, I am. So that is what Bhagavan is referring to here as poruḻ. Only that which shines without appearing or disappearing, as the base, as the ground, as the here he uses a Tamil word, iḍaṉ, but he could equally well have used the Sanskrit words ādhara or adhisthana, the ground, the base, or he could also have used the word space, the space in which all these things appear. That is the vastu. And he describes that vastu as pūṇḍṛamā poruḻ. So that one thing that shines without appearing or disappearing, as the base for the appearing and disappearing of everything else, that alone is the reality, which is pūṇḍṛam. Pūṇḍṛam is a Tamil form of the Sanskrit word purna. Purna means the whole. That other than, in a philosophical sense, purna means that other than which there is nothing. That is, it implies the infinite whole. But the one thing that actually exists. So the nature of this one real substance or reality, namely I am, it is infinite. Why is it infinite? Because it has no limits. As Bhagavan described it in verse 4, it is antamilakan. It is the infinite awareness. The awareness, kan there literally means I, but it implies awareness. He's using I as a metaphor for awareness, because the I is what sees everything else. Awareness is what knows everything else. So he uses I as a metaphor, but the real I doesn't know anything other than itself, because it's antamila, it's without limit. So what is implied by the word antamila in verse 4 is what is implied here by pūṇḍṛam. That is, whatever is without limit, that has to be the whole. And whatever is the whole has to be without limit, because it's only forms that have limits. And forms obviously are not the whole, because there are so many forms. Each form is distinguished from each other form. Even the totality of all forms is not the whole, because the forms appear and disappear. So in what do they appear and disappear? That is poruḻ, that is pūṇḍṛam, that is the vastu, that is what is meant by the Sanskrit word purna, and its Tamil form pūṇḍṛam. So this verse is a very, very important verse. Firstly, in the first sentence, he's basically summarizing what he said in the previous three verses. And secondly, in the second sentence, he is giving us a definition of what is the reality. So this work is Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu. It's 40 verses on what actually exists. What actually exists is only this poruḻ. in most of the verses of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Bhagavan isn't directly talking about what actually exists. Most of the verses, he's talking about ego and world and such things. Why? Because what actually exists always exists as it is. It's always there without appearing or disappearing. It's always shining without appearing or disappearing. It's the ground in which everything else appears and disappears. The problem we face is what seems to obscure from our view the knowledge of this poruḻ is that we, instead of being aware of ourselves as just I am, we are now aware of ourselves as I am this body, and we are consequently aware of this world of forms. So the problem is ego and everything known by ego. Of course, everything known by ego is only a secondary problem. This world is a secondary problem. The primary problem is ego, because it's only in the view of ego that the world seems to exist. So most of the verses of Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, though the work is about what actually exists, Bhagavan is talking about what doesn't actually exist, namely ego. Because if we understand the nature of ego, as Bhagavan explains it in Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, we will also understand how to get rid of it. And since everything else seems to exist only in the view of ego, by giving up ego, we give up everything. And what then remains is the one thing that never appears or disappears. So this verse 7 is a very, very crucial verse. When he talks about the world and awareness, the world here, we can take it to mean the physical world. We can also take it to mean not only the physical world, also the internal world, the world of thoughts and feelings and perceptions and memories and likes and dislikes and everything. They see there's the world that seems to be outside, the world of physical phenomena, and the world that seems to be inside, the world of mental phenomena. All of these appear only in the view of ego. So what he's talking about, and all phenomena are objects. So what he's talking about in this verse, basically, what he refers to as the world is all objects. What he refers to as awareness is ego, the subject, the one who knows all objects. So we could also paraphrase this verse by saying, though the objects and the subject arise and subside simultaneously, the objects shine only by the subject. That is, only in the view of the subject that the objects seem to exist. Only that which shines without appearing and disappearing as the ground or place or space for the appearing and disappearing of objects and the subject is the substance, the real substance, which is the whole. We can paraphrase it like that. So this is a very crucial verse, because here Bhagavan is connecting what he says in so many other verses about ego with the underlying reality. That is why he talks so much about ego in this, because our aim is to know what is the reality that underlies ego. That is, though ego as such does not exist, unlike objects have no existence whatsoever. They appear to exist only in the view of ego. But ego, though as ego it's wholly unreal, there is an element of reality in ego. That element of reality is the fundamental awareness I am. That is, ego is as Bhagavan often said, it's the false awareness I am this body. In that false awareness, there is a real element and a false element. The real element is I am. The false element is the adjuncts, the upadhi, namely the body, consisting of 5 sheaves. So if we want to know what is ultimately real, it is only through ego that we can, it's only by investigating ego but we can know what is ultimately real, because what is ultimately real is the reality of ego. We cannot see what is ultimately real outside ourselves as an object, because it's not an object. It's not even the subject. It's the reality of the subject. So that ultimate reality is what he refers to here as poruḻ. And as he defines it beautifully here, it is that which shines without appearing or disappearing as the ground or the place or the space for the appearing and disappearing of subject and object, the world and awareness, or the ego and the world, in other words. So this is a very crucial verse. And then in the next verse, he goes on to talk about how to see this poruḻ, but we'll keep that for next time, because that's the verse we have to deal with next time. So there's a continuity, because here he defines poruḻ, then the immediate next thing is, how do we see this poruḻ? That's what he talks about in the next verse. I think that's enough explanation for this verse for the time being. But if anyone has any questions about this, we can see if I've got an answer for it, whether I can clarify it in the light of Bhagavan's teachings.
Thank you, Michael. So to summarize, could you just summarize give the criteria for reality according to Bhagavan?
Well, before we decide what are criteria for reality, we need to understand what Bhagavan means by reality. That is, what is real is what actually exists. And anything that seems to exist but doesn't actually exist is not real. It is unreal. So as I say, we first need to understand what is meant by real. So what is meant by real is that it actually exists. So what is it? What is the nature of what actually exists? Bhagavan gave us three defining characteristics. It must be eternal. In other words, it shouldn't appear and disappear. As he says here, it never appears or disappears. Whatever appears and disappears, as Bhagavan said, anything that seems to exist at one time and not at another time doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist. So it must be eternal. It must be unchanging, because anything that changes, it was one thing at one time, and it's another thing at another time. Now, I am a man. Well, this body is a man in its 60s. At one time, this same body was a small child, but though this is the same body but was once a small child, it's undergone so many changes, and likewise, all phenomena undergo changes. The body undergoes changes. The mind is undergoing changes moment to moment to moment. So everything is changing. But the one thing that never changes, the one thing that never appears or disappears, that has to be that alone is the reality. So whatever appears and disappears is not real. Whatever is not permanent is not real. That means whatever changes in any way is not real. And the third and most important criteria, it must be swayam prakasha. That means self-shining, because self-shining means it must know itself by its own light of awareness. In other words, it shouldn't depend on any other thing to be known. So whatever is not self-shining, whatever shines by the light of something else, is dependent on that other thing. It seems to exist only because it shines in the view of that other thing. So the world seems to exist only because it shines in the view of the mind. So the world isn't real because it doesn't shine by its own light. As Bhagavan says in this verse, it shines by awareness. The awareness he's referring to here is the awareness that appears and disappears. That is ego. So the world has no existence independent of ego. In other words, objects do not exist independent of the subject. Why? Because objects seem to exist only in the view of the subject. So the seeming existence of objects, the objects derive their seeming existence from the seeming existence of ourself as ego. That is, if there wasn't ego, nothing else would seem to exist. So the seeming existence of all phenomena depends upon ego, in whose view it appears. But even ego is not real. Why? Because it appears and disappears. Since it appears and disappears, it seems to exist when it appears, namely in waking and dream. it doesn't seem to exist in sleep. So it doesn't actually exist, even when it seems to exist, according to Bhagavan. So everything else depends for its semi-existence upon the semi-existence of our self as ego, because it's only in the view of our self as ego that other things seem to exist. Ego doesn't actually exist. It merely seems to exist. So from where does it derive its semi-existence? Only from the real existence of ourself, from our own actual existence. That is, as Bhagavan explained, ego is the adjunct mixed awareness, I am this body. What is real in ego is only that fundamental awareness, I am. What is false is the adjunct, so that the adjunct mixed awareness is false, though it has an element of reality. The element of reality is that fundamental awareness, I am. So ego derives its semi-existence from the real existence of ourself as I am. So what is it that exists eternally? What is it that never undergoes any change? And what is it that shines by its own light? It is only I am. It's only our own being that shines by its own light. It never undergoes any change. All changes are only for ego. Ego takes itself to be a body, and so once I was young, now I'm old. Actually, ego isn't changing, but its upadhis are changing. What it identifies with is changing. So now I identify myself as an old man in my 60s. At one time, I was identifying myself, I'm a young boy playing my games or whatever, living in my dream world or whatever. And then as a young man, full of enthusiasm to learn about what the meaning of life is or whatever it was. All these changes are there. Ego itself is not changing, but what it identifies with is changing. Ego, the only change ego undergoes is in rising and subsiding. All other seeming changes of ego are only changes in the objects that it is identifying with. So this body, this person I take myself to be, is an object. The mind I take myself to be. Now I know so many things, but I didn't know in the past. So many things I knew in the past, I've now forgotten. So the mind is changing, as I say, it's changing from moment to moment. But that which is aware of all these things, namely ego, is the same ego, constant throughout. But this ego is not real because it appears and disappears. What is real is only the reality of ego, namely the fundamental awareness I am. So I am shines by its own light. Ego seems to shine by its own light, but though ego seems to shine by its own light, it doesn't actually shine by its own light because it appears and disappears. The light by which it is shining is constant. That is the light by which ego is shining is the fundamental awareness I am. That is what is real. That is what is self-shining. So ego seems to be self-shining. Ego claims to be self-shining, but it is not self-shining. All other objects, they shine only by the light of ego. And ego shines by the light of pure awareness, of the real awareness I am. So that's a very beautiful definition Bhagavan gives of what, how can we determine what is real? These are the three lakshanas, the three marks or sign of what is actually real. And only one thing matches that. In our whole experience, only one thing is eternal. Only one thing never undergoes any change. Only one thing shines by its own light. That is our fundamental awareness I am. Ego poses as if it's permanent. Yes, I was there in sleep. Ego wasn't there in sleep. What was there in sleep was only the reality of ego, namely I am. But because ego identifies itself both with the I am and with the body, so ego is a confused mixture of what is real and what is unreal. So ego as such was not present in sleep, so it's not eternal. ego is undergoing the change of rising and subsiding, so it's not real. And though ego seems to shine by its own light, actually it is shining only by the light of I am. So it is not self-shining.
Thank you, Michael. And that's a good question. Questioner likes to be anonymous. Is the will, within quotes, will?
Yes.
The most important kosha as far as accessing and killing the ego is concerned.
Yes, but because the will consists of vasanas. That is, superficially we talk about the will as being likes, dislikes, desires, attachments, and so on. These are obviously the grosser manifestations of the will. But if we analyze it, if we observe carefully, where do all these likes and dislikes come from? In their seed form, they are what are called vasanas. So what the will is in its subtlest form is just a mass of vasanas, a myriad of vasanas, so many vasanas. And these vasanas are constantly pulling us in this direction and that direction. And Bhagavan has classified all vasanas into two groups. There are Vishaya vasanas and Satvasana. Satvasana is one. Vishaya vasanas are many. The Vishaya vasanas are the seeds that give rise to Vishayas. Vishayas means objects or phenomena. So, our liking to attend to this or to that is a Vishaya vasana. Our inclination to attend to this or that is a Vishaya vasana. Whereas our inclination to attend just to our being and thereby to be as we actually are, that is Satvasana. So the Satvasana alone can save us from the Vishaya vasanas. But we need to, the Satvasana is the love to know ourselves, to know and to be what we actually are. That has been the seed of that seed of called Satvasana has been sown in our heart by Bhagavan. But though Bhagavan is doing everything to nurture it, we need to cooperate. So we need to play our part in cultivating and nurturing this Satvasana, which we do by trying more and more to turn within. The more we turn within, the more Satvasana is strengthened and the Vishaya vasanas are weakened. So since the will is all these vasanas, yes, definitely, it's the most subtle and also by far and away the most important of all the sheaves, because it is the will consists of the seeds that give rise not only to the other four sheaves, but to all Vishayas, all objects, all phenomena. So it is by far and away the most important. So, but an important point to remember, ego is not any of the five sheaves. Ego is that which takes all the five sheaves to be itself. It identifies with all of them. So ego is not its vasanas. The nature of ego is to have vasanas because ego is always seeking happiness. So its inclination to seek happiness is what gives rise to all these vasanas. But so ego always has vasanas. Ego is never without vasanas, but ego is not its vasanas. Because the vasanas are an adjunct, something that we identify with. I like this, I dislike that. All these are we are identifying ourselves with these likes and dislikes, or in other words, with the vasanas that give rise to the likes and dislikes. So that is when the body dies, all sheaves die except for this will, because what ego takes with it from life to life is its vasanas. But those vasanas, though the other four sheaves seem to have disappeared, the will is that is the vasanas are the seeds that give rise to all the other four sheaves. So in a sense, we take the other four sheaves with us in seed form. And those seeds are the vasanas, which are what constitute the will. Yes.
So those seeds are the one which drown us in the ocean of
exactly
actions.
Yeah, because what Bhagavan calls Vishaya vasanas, are also called karma vasanas. Why? Because if you have a liking to experience, or an inclination to experience a certain vishaya, that inclination will prompt you to act in order to experience that. So the vishaya vasanas, we can say they're synonymous with the karma vasanas, or they're what are driving the karma vasanas. Whichever way we look at it, it amounts to the same thing. So those seeds are, as Bhagavan says in verse 2 of Upadeshundya, they are the seeds that drown us that cause us to drown in this ocean of action.
So all karma vasanas originate from Vishaya vasanas, but not all Vishaya vasanas give rise to karma vasanas.
No, no, I think it's the same. That is, any Vishaya you have an inclination to experience, you can only experience by some action. At least you have to attend to that thing. That is an action. Attending to anything other than ourselves is an action. So the Vishaya vasanas and karma vasanas, they're inseparable.
Go hand in hand.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's easiest just to think of them as it's just two ways of describing the same thing.
Okay.
Every Vishaya vasana is a karma vasana.
So will or chittam is the totality of all vasanas.
Exactly.
Thank you. So go to the next question by Umberto. I debate myself with the concept that all things appear to exist only in the view of the ego. There are many things that exist without our knowing it, like the Americas, for example. The Americas existed way before Christopher Columbus discovered them. The same with X-rays, ultrasound, etc.
When did Christopher Columbus and the Americas come into existence? Only when you came to know about them. Now we know so many things, but we didn't know when we were a small child. Now we may know about history and about geography and about philosophy and about physics, about the Big Bang, or all these things. When did all these things come into existence? Do they exist independent of our perception of them? All these things are just ideas. Christopher Columbus is for us just an idea. Some Spanish adventurer who set off to find the edge of the world, or thinking maybe he'd find India, and he came instead to America. So all these are just ideas. If we think about it, even the Big Bang, where did the Big Bang exist? It exists only in our mind. Have we ever seen the Big Bang? Even if we'd seen the Big Bang, it would still be only in our mind. Now I see this PC in front of me. Where did this PC exist? Only in my mind. Can we say anything, whether we perceive it, or we just infer it, or we just believe it? We may believe in heaven and hell and ghosts and evil spirits and all sorts of things. Where do they exist? They exist only in our mind. We may believe in evolution. We may believe in climate change. We may believe in so many things. We may believe there's a war going on in Ukraine. There are also wars in the Middle East. There are also wars in Africa. Where do all these wars exist? Only in our mind. How can we say anything exists independent of our knowledge of it? Yeah, either we perceive it directly, or we know about it through hearsay, as like the history and geography. Most of it, we haven't been to those places. We know about it just from hearsay, because we read it in our history books when we were at school, or since we've come to know about it through the internet or through news channels or whatever. All knowledge, however it is, whatever be the means by which we acquire knowledge, it all exists only in the view of ego. That is, we come to this subject. We'll be going to this subject more detail, not next month. Next month, we'll be talking about verse 8. But then from the following month, we talk about verse 9. There, Bhagavan is talking about this thing. That is, in Vedanta, knowledge about anything other than ourselves is analyzed as consisting of three components. That is, to know something, there has to be something to be known. So there's the object that is known. And nothing can be known without a means of knowing it. So there's the means of knowing it. And most important of all, there's the knower of it. Because there cannot be any means of knowing anything without a knower. And there cannot be anything known without a means of knowing it. So whatever is known, what is technically called the prameya or nyaya, the thing that is known, in other words, the objects, depend for their seeming existence on two things. Firstly, on the means by which they're known, and secondly, on the thing by which they're known, so the knower, in other words. So all objects depend upon the means of knowing them. That is, I see this PC in front of me. The means by which I know this PC is seeing. So the PC is the object. The means of knowing is the seeing. And the seer of it is me, I, who am seeing it. So the PC is something known. It couldn't exist as something known if there wasn't a means of knowing it. And there couldn't be a means of knowing it if there wasn't a knower of it. So ultimately, all these three depend upon the one. The first one is the knower. So whatever knowledge you have about anything, you know it by some means. You may know it because you've seen it, or because you've heard it, or because you've tasted it, or touched it, or smelt it. These are by sensory perception. We also know by more indirect means. We know because we read about it in the newspapers, or we read about it in the internet, or we met someone who had been to that place. So it's there's so many ways by which we may know it by inference. We may work out if such and such is the case, and such is the case, then such and such must be the case. There's logical, that is what they call deductive reasoning, where you can conclude something definitely. If you have two propositions, all men are mortal, Socrates was a man. From those two pieces of information, you can arrive at a third piece of information. Socrates was mortal. Because if all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, that means we can logically conclude Socrates is mortal. So that's one means of knowing things. That's deductive reasoning. A lot of things we can't know by deductive reasoning. Most science is not by deductive reasoning. It's by what's called inductive reasoning. You make many observations, and all those observations seem to be tallying. For example, one example that used to be given is every swan that has ever been seen is white. So all swans are white. That was an example that used to be used for inductive reasoning. But that was proved wrong, because now we all know there are black swans. Native to Australia, there's one species of black swan. Native to South America, there's another species of black swan. But before anyone had seen any black swans, it was perfectly reasonable to think, since every swan that anyone has ever seen is a white swan, therefore, so there's so many ways we come to know things, by deductive reasoning, by inductive reasoning, by just belief in testimony. Because the scientists tell us that there was a big bang, and they've studied these things, okay, we believe there was a big bang. Or because the priest in the church tells us, but in the Bible it is said God created the world in 7 days, so God created the world in 7 days. Then someone else says, no, but in the Vedas it is said the world was created from the mind of Brahma. And there's so many in Hindu philosophy, there's so many different theories of creation. So take your pick. Which one do you want to believe in? But ultimately, it's all hearsay. But the one thing we know if we think about it deeply, is that we cannot know that anything exists independent of our perception of it, independent of our knowledge of it. So why do we believe, why did the Big Bang exist? Because we have heard about it. Did the Big Bang exist before any scientists had come up with the idea of the Big Bang? And even if those scientists who came up with that idea, did they exist before we came to know about them? So ultimately, it's all, everything we know, we can't say anything, but we know any object exists independent of our knowledge, independent of our knowledge of it, however we may have come to know it. So everything ultimately depends on ego. Everything, because everything seems to exist only in the view of ego. All the science and religion and philosophy and history and geography, all knowledge is known by whom? Only by ego. So it's only in the view of ego that all these things seem to exist. So how can we say anything exists independent of ego?
Right. Thank you, Michael. There's a question. My experience is that regardless of how I might steer things, it's pointless because there is a vitality that keeps springing up from both within and without that organizes everything. It seems to be impossible for me to give true life to any ideas of mine, even practical ideas. My self-attentiveness is slowly eclipsing other focuses, but I haven't done this. Rather, it's been a vitality that has been actively repeating self-attentiveness. I've tried to speed it up or slow it down at times, but I can't. I'm unsure how to practice deliberately because the thought of practice originates as an idea from my mind. Is this a typical or natural phenomena when trying to practice self-attentiveness?
It is not actually natural for ego to attend to itself. The nature of ego is to always attend to other things, because ego can survive as ego only by attending to other things. So we have very strong inclinations to attend to things other than ourselves. So we cannot attend to ourselves without effort, without deliberately turning our attention and trying to hold on to that self-attentiveness. Because if we don't make that effort, then the natural flow of the mind is to go outwards. If you're in a river, if you fall in a river, you will be swept away by the current. If you want to avoid being swept away by the current, you need to swim against the current. Likewise with the mind, the mind or ego. The natural flow of ego is outwards. It's the very nature of ego to always be grasping something other than itself. Urupatri undam, urupatri nekum, urupatri undumika oḍuṅgum, udittu urupatram, Bhagavan says in verse 25. Grasping form, it comes into existence. Grasping form, it stands. Grasping and feeding on forms, it flourishes abundantly. Leaving form, it grasps form. So the very nature of ego is to be constantly grasping form. So we have to swim against the current, and swimming against the current requires effort. So without effort, we cannot turn within. But there is a higher power that is also pulling us within. So the effort we make to turn within can also be viewed as yielding ourselves to that power of attraction that is pulling us back within. But whether we consider it as yielding to that or making the effort to attend to ourselves, even to yield ourselves to that, effort is necessary. Because if we don't make effort to yield ourselves to that inward pull, we will be yielding ourselves to this outward pull of the vasanas. So this path we cannot follow this path without making effort to turn within. Sometimes it may seem to us but we are pulled in of our own, without any volition on our part. But we are pulled in only because at that moment we yielded ourselves to that pull. And yielding ourselves to that pull does require effort. That pull is far greater than the effort we make. But the effort we make is to hold on to ourselves in order to avoid being carried away by the vasanas. Is that a clear answer? I don't know who asked that question.
Yeah, but I think it's very clear. So you're basically, this devotee just needs to yield and not fight it. Particularly if it's in the positive direction and of self-attention.
Yes, but even to yield ourselves to the pull of grace requires effort. Because if we don't make that effort to hold on to self-attentiveness, we will be carried away by other things.
Right.
Holding on to self-attentiveness is yielding ourselves to that grace.
Yes, that answers it. Thank you. And then as in continuation of that, and another question just came up that effort must be made with the will, correct?
Yes, the will that is required to make that effort is what is called bhakti, love. We must have great love to know and to be what we actually are.
Because one of the components of the will is the sattvasana.
Yes, exactly. Our turning within is only the result of sattvasana. Right. Because the Vishaya vasanas all pull our mind outwards towards Vishayas. Vishayas means all objects or phenomena are Vishayas. So the inclination to attend to anything other than ourselves is a Vishaya vasana. The inclination to attend only to our own being, I am, that is sattvasana.
So
I don't know whether anyone else has spoken about sattvasana. This is, as far as I'm aware, I've only ever come across this term from Bhagavan. But it's a very, very beautiful term if we think about it, because what is sat? Sat is being. So our inclination to hold on to our being, that is sattvasana. Or we can also describe it as our inclination to be as we actually are, that is sattvasana. How can we be as we actually are? Only by holding on to our being. So it's a very, it's a word with very deep meaning and implication, sattvasana. It's what is also sometimes, Bhagavan also sometimes described it as swatma bhakti, love for our own self.
Right. I haven't seen those terms anywhere else.
I haven't. They may be there. I don't know, but I've never come across. Swatma bhakti may have been there before, but this sattvasana, I've never come across it anywhere.
Thank you, Michael. So a question, did Bhagavan have the vasana to be our guru in his lifetime?
Who is Bhagavan? Bhagavan, vasanas are only for ego. Bhagavan is in this verse 7, what does Bhagavan say? Only that which shines without appearing and disappearing as the base for the appearing and disappearing of everything else is poruḻ. Bhagavan is that poruḻ. The poruḻ he's talking about there, that is what Bhagavan actually is. So he is not, it's only for ego that there are vasanas. Bhagavan is that poruḻ. And that poruḻ is pure love. It is infinite love, because in Bhagavan's view, he alone exists. Nothing other than himself exists. So he doesn't see us as other than himself. So he loves us as himself. So the infinite love that he has for us as himself is what we experience as his grace. So that is his, it's not an inclination, it's his very nature. So his very nature is to draw us back to himself. Just like the nature of a magnet is to attract all iron to itself, the nature of Bhagavan is to attract us all to himself. But he is not, though we see him as a person outside, that is not what he actually is. What he actually is that which is shining in our heart as I. So he's always drawing us back within. But we must be willing to yield ourselves to that power, that power of attraction, that magnetic power that is drawing us back within. We must be willing to yield ourselves to it. And we can yield ourselves to it only by holding on to self-attentiveness.
And he also discouraged being assigned as a guru, right? That sort of the formal guru-disciple relationship that used to be there in the tradition. Well,
Bhagavan said, guru is a guru only in the view of the disciple. In the view of the real guru, there is neither guru nor disciple. There is only one. So, but Bhagavan said guru is absolutely necessary, because so long as we raise his ego, we need to be drawn back to ourselves. And that power that draws us back to ourselves is guru. And that power is nothing other than ourselves. It's nothing other than what we actually are. So what Bhagavan taught us about guru is something very, very deep and very refined. Though guru appears in human form, guru is not human. Guru is nothing but Atma-swarupa, our own real nature.
Right.
Because if he were anything other than that, he'd be unreal. Because names and forms all appear and disappear.
Thank you, Michael. So there's a question from Nalini. Hi, Michael. Many thanks for the lucid explanation of the attributes of poruḻ. Question. Are the terms Maya, ignorance, and ego one and the same?
Yes. That is one thing Bhagavan has made very clear. That is, in the past, there used to be disputes among Advaitins as to where is what's the word they used? The ashraya. What is the ashraya? What is the place of ignorance? Is the ashraya of ignorance Jiva or is it Brahman? And there were actually two major schools among Shankara's followers. One group said that ignorance must exist in Brahman. The other said it must exist in Jiva. Those who said that it exists in Brahman, they said Jiva arises because of ignorance. So the ignorance exists before Jiva. Whereas those who said, then the others would say, no, but if you say the ignorance exists in Brahman, that implies that Brahman is ignorant. So it was a big quarrel. Bhagavan has simplified the whole thing. There is no ignorance other than ego. Because what is ego? Ego is the false awareness, I am this body. That is avidya. That is vidya, the knowledge is the pure awareness I am. That always shines. So avidya is not exact, though it's called ignorance, what it is, there's never a moment when we don't cease to know ourselves as we actually are, as Brahman, as I am. But instead of knowing ourselves as just I am, we know ourselves as I am Michael, I am Kumar, I am whoever. So, or I am Nalini. So that is ignorance. So the ignorance doesn't exist independent of ego. Ego itself is the ignorance, and ego itself is Maya. So yes, you're absolutely right. But Bhagavan says this very clearly in the first paragraph of Vichara Sangraham, which is one of a lot of Vichara Sangraham is not actually Bhagavan's teachings, but that first paragraph of the first section is pure Bhagavan's teachings. And there he says, Nan Endru Erum Bodhame, the awareness that rises as I, is called by in many different ways as Tat Bodham. Tat Bodham means that's a particular term. I don't know whether it's used in Sanskrit in that sense, but in Tamil, Advaita philosophy, Bodham is a term that is used to describe ego. Ahankaram, ego. Avidya, maya, malam, impurity, jivan. So all these terms refer only to that false awareness that rises as I. So here Bhagavan is very explicit, but avidya and maya are nothing but ego. And there's another place in when Bhagavan translated Chudamani, he wrote a Mangalam verse. And he begins that verse, that Mangalam verse, aham ēṇum mula avidya, 100, to remove that root ignorance called I. That means ego is the false, is the root ignorance. So Bhagavan has simplified and clarified things that there was a lot of confusion about these things, but Bhagavan has removed all grounds for confusion by presenting it in such a simple and such a clear way. So there is no such thing as Maya or avidya other than ego. Ego itself is what is called avidya. Ego itself is what is called Maya. Maya is said to have there's said to be two powers of Maya, Āvarana Shakti and Vikshepa Shakti. The Āvarana Shakti is the false awareness, I am this body. As a result of that false awareness, we know all other things. That is the Vikshepa. So the false awareness, I am this body, is Āvarana. The knowledge of multiplicity that results from that is Vikshepa. As Bhagavan says in verse 4 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu, if oneself is a form, the world and God will be likewise. So if there's the Āvarana, if we take ourselves to be the form of a body, we'll see all this myriad of forms. So Bhagavan has simplified and clarified. There's these. If we take ignorance to be something other than ourselves, then how can we get rid of it? The problem is, avidya is the very nature of ego. If we remove ego, we remove avidya, we remove maya, we remove everything. That's the central message of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu. The root problem is only ego. For whom is avidya? For whom is maya? Only for ego, because ego itself is avidya, ego itself is maya.
Thank you. So Nalini thanks you for the explanation and the quotations.
Good question.
Thank you. And so there's another question from one of the previous questioners. Can you, either you or Michael, recommend a resource where I can learn these terms? I'm beginning to understand some of what Michael is saying, but I need a glossary. Thank you. So I think the original, your previous edition of Happiness and Art of Being had a beautiful glossary.
Yes, it did have a glossary. Actually, that's still available. If you go onto my website, in the Happiness and the Art of Being page, the page about the book, there are links to the old PDFs. So I think the first edition of first print edition had that had a glossary in it. It was a glossary come index.
Right.
But these terms, as we study Bhagavan's teachings more and more, we gradually become familiar with these terms. It's a bit like when you learn a new language. You don't all of a sudden, you don't learn a language by picking up a dictionary and reading the dictionary entries. As you familiarize yourself with the language, you become familiar with more and more terms in the language, and they all slowly fall into place. So glossary can be helpful, but it's generally when I write, I generally try to explain the words I'm using at least once. I may use Tamil and Sanskrit words, but I very seldom use them without explaining what they mean. So just by reading more and more about Bhagavan's teachings, you'll slowly pick up these terms. And Bhagavan's teachings we can't learn overnight, because though Bhagavan's teachings are very simple, they're also very deep and very subtle. Bhagavan has all of Bhagavan's teachings, the core of Bhagavan's teachings is in his own original writings. And that's very few. The Arunachal Stuti Panchakam consists of what, about 150 verses. And then Upadeshundya, Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu, Ekama Panchakam, Atma-vichara, and Apalapatu, that's another, 85 verses. And then some of the verses, some original verses of Bhagavan in Uڵḷadu Nāṛpadu Anubandham and among the stray verses. So probably not more than 250 verses are there, plus Nana and some portions of Vichara Sangraham are the original writings of Bhagavan. So it's not a huge amount that we have to learn, but in these few texts, Bhagavan has given so much, but it is just by reading these texts, we can't understand them. That we can understand something, but we can't understand the full depth and profundity of them on first reading. We read them, we try to understand them, we do the Sravana, we read them, then we think about them, do the Manana, try to understand them, and we try to put them into practice. And slowly, particularly the most important thing is the practice. The more we put them into practice, the more meaningful the texts become to us. If you're given a map of a country you've never been to, you won't, you'll understand something from the map, but the map will really become meaningful to you when you actually take that map and go to the country. Then you'll say, oh, that's what this mark referred to, it's this. And so everything will fall into place because of your traveling to that country. Likewise, it's by following the Bhagavan's path, but we are enabled to see more and more depth of meaning in it. So we have to be patient in understanding Bhagavan's teaching. When we first read, we understand something. As we go on, we become more and more familiar with it. And because Bhagavan, all his original writings are in Tamil and a few in Sanskrit and so on. But I mean, mostly everything that's in other languages, it's there in Tamil. So because Bhagavan was writing in these Indian languages, there's a lot of technical terms that are used a lot in Indian philosophy, but we have to gradually become familiar with. We can't do justice to translating Bhagavan's teachings without explaining the terms. So slowly, if you're studying Bhagavan's teachings, you will slowly become familiar with these terms. But as Kumar pointed out, if you find it helpful, there is a glossary in one of the old editions, in the first print edition of Happiness from the Art of Being, which is available as a PDF on my website. That is I think there's a PDF before it was printed, the PDF of the first edition and PDF of the more recent edition.
Right. And I posted the PDF link on the chat box. If anyone wants it, they can pull it. So then let's go to the last question. I lose awareness many times. Why?
You never lose awareness. You are awareness itself. You can lose awareness of something, but you cannot lose awareness itself. Even when you fall asleep, you don't lose awareness. You lose awareness of the world. You lose awareness of the body. but you still remain as the fundamental awareness I am. So we never lose awareness. So when you say you lose awareness, what do you mean? You lose awareness of what? Okay, then I'll guess. I guess what you mean is you lose awareness of yourself. You never lose awareness of yourself. You may lose self-attentiveness. That is, though we are always aware I am, because we're more interested in attending to other things, we attend to other things, and thereby though we don't cease to be aware I am, we overlook that fundamental awareness I am. It's just the background. It's like the screen in the cinema. When we go to the cinema, we sit for 2 or 3 hours looking at a screen, but we never notice the screen because we're more interested in the pictures that are appearing on the screen. But the screen is always there. We cannot say, but for a moment, we cannot see the film without seeing the screen on which the film is projected. We cannot be aware of anything without being aware I am. So we may overlook the fundamental awareness I am, but we never cease to be aware I am. So yes, it is the nature of the mind because the mind is so interested in other things, it keeps on going outwards, and so we lose our hold on self-attentiveness. The only way to overcome that is to try again and again. However many times our attention slips away from ourselves, we have to bring it back to ourselves, as simple as that. But it requires patience and perseverance, because the very nature of the mind is to always trying to slip away. So, and we'll often be carried away by the vasanas that are pulling us away. So however many times we get pulled away by vasanas, we have to pull our attention back towards ourselves. It's only by that patient and persistent practice that we can succeed in this path. I hope that's an adequate answer to that question.
Yeah. The questioner says thanks.
Okay.
So, and then there are a couple of questions related to sattvasana, and I'll pose those, and with that, we'll close the session. So the first question is, where exactly is Bhagavan mentioning this term sattvasana?
Good question. I don't know. It is, we can say it's part of Ramana law. I mean, it's something that is sort of handed down to us. It may be there in some books. I don't know. I hadn't really thought of that, but it's a term that I heard from Sadhuam, definitely. Whether it's mentioned in Guru Vachakavaya or in any text, maybe not, but it's just one of those things. Those who were with Bhagavan, who really understood what Bhagavan were talking about, they all talk about sattvasana. So there's also, to a certain extent, an oral tradition, what has been handed down to us orally. Not everything comes in talks and other records of what Bhagavan has said, but this is definitely a term Bhagavan often used. Whether you can find it in any books or not, I'm not sure.
Particularly from Sri Muruganar and Sri Sadhuvam, probably if you heard it, probably it's coming along those lines.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then, this is an interesting question. So is this, could Bhagavan have coined this term in reference to sort of a mass sattvasana, that is large groups of people participating in sattvasana together?
That is, all vasanas are Vishaya vasanas, except for this one vasana, the sattvasana. So it is the opposite vasana. It's the vasana, the inclination, the liking we have to turn within, that is what is called sattvasana. I'm not sure whether I fully understood the question, so I don't know whether I've answered it properly, but...
Yeah, I think he's wondering about the collective group people trying to be on the same page.
This is a path we each have to follow for ourselves. There's no group, we can't do group meditation. some places, group meditation or guided meditation is very popular, but that's really not applicable in Bhagavan's path. This is a solitary path. This is a path from ourself to ourself. We ourselves have to go back to ourself. We cannot take our family and friends with us. Well, in a sense, we do. If we subside, everything else subsides with us. So if we want to save the whole world, all we have to do is save ourselves. If you want to save everyone in the dream from the misery they're experiencing, all you need to do is to wake up from a dream. But waking up is up to you. You have to choose to wake up. No one can choose that for you. So we each have to follow this path ourselves. So if you have sattvasana, that is sufficient. Don't worry about whether any of the rest of us have sattvasana. Because if you cultivate that sattvasana and thereby merge back in your source, since we exist only in your view, we will merge back with you.
Right. Thank you, Michael. And thank you, Srikanth. Srikanth has actually posted a PDF too. So if you want to just directly download it, you can, of the book. There is, I think there's one question from Ram. Ram, want to go ahead?
Yes, thank you, Kumar. Michael, thanks for the session today. Two questions following up what you said. Whenever the mind goes out, bring it back. We know that by now, chiseled into our mind. The thing about it is twofold. One is I have no idea whether I'm making progress or not, number one. Second is I feel I'm 52 now. I've been doing sadhana since I was 26. Who am I is one part. The other one is chanting God's name, which is more gross and it appeals to me more, but I do who am I as well. But I feel as I'm growing older, I'm not sure if I'm instead of progress, I feel I'm going the other way. And the reason is I feel I'm unable to detach from things, especially work. I'm getting better at detaching from money and other things, but I sometimes feel the anxiety levels and the panic levels are actually going up as my age is going up. So I don't know if I'm making any progress or not, or in fact, if I'm going in the other direction. So to your point, bringing the mind again and again, does the result happen one day? Are we at a point where we can gauge our own progress? So stream of consciousness there, but to you.
We cannot gauge our own progress. When Bhagavan was asked, what is the sign of progress? Bhagavan said there's only one sign of progress, perseverance. So long as you're persevering in trying to follow the path, you're progressing. Because that's all that is required to succeed in this path is simple perseverance. So long as we're trying to turn our attention back within, it may seem to us we're not very successful, but we turn our attention back towards I, and again, the next moment it jumps out again. Doesn't matter. So long as we are trying, so long as we're persevering in trying, we're moving in the right direction, success is absolutely assured. But the more we persevere, the faster we'll progress. That's all we can say.
Thank you. As my age is increasing, my anxiety and panic are also increasing. Is that, do I need to be concerned about it?
No, because these are all vasanas. That is, the vasanas were already there. They just happen to be coming to the surface more. Anxiety and all these things, these are quite natural to us because we take ourselves to be this body. What a vulnerable thing this body is. It's subject to disease, old age, death, and even most of the activities we do, even crossing the road is a dangerous activity. We don't know where death or injury may come from. So we've got lots of reason to be anxious. It's the nature of an embodied being to be anxious because we take ourselves to this body and this body is very vulnerable. So these things are inevitable. Things that we may not have noticed before, that the anxiety is potentially there in all of us. It may be just coming to the surface more. And we have to be ready for that. When we are following this path, as Bhagavan said, all that is inside has to come out. So all these vasanas, but we may not even have noticed before, we will become more and more aware of them as we go deeper in this path. And they will seem to become stronger and stronger, because the more we try to go within, the more resistance there will be. One analogy I often give, if a group of hunters are hunting a tiger and their only weapons are knives and spears, they may have wounded the tiger greatly, and finally they surround the tiger. The tiger is cornered, and the tiger is much weakened because it's been wounded so many times. But though it's weak, it will fight with, because it's surrounded, it's fighting for its very life, so it will fight with ever great, as it gets weaker, it will fight with greater ferocity. Likewise with the ego and its vasanas. The deeper we go within, the more resistance we will face, because the closer we're coming to and eradicating this ego. So the ego naturally fights back more and more and more. So this path will, we can, that's why we cannot judge our progress. In fact, it may seem to us we're far worse than we were when we began. But the reason we seem to be far worse is that now, because our mind is pure, the more our mind is purified, the more we will become aware of the existing impurities, because purification means clarification. The clearer the mind becomes, the more the slightest dirt will seem to be a great blemish. If you've got a very dirty cloth, you won't be able to see the deeply ingrained stains on it. If you wash that cloth, remove the superficial dirt, then you see the dirt that is really deeply ingrained. Likewise with this path. So we cannot estimate or evaluate our progress. All we can do is persevere. So long as we're persevering, we're making progress. That's all we need know.
Great encouragement with that reply. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. Two great analogies there. Thank you.
Right.
With that, we'll conclude today's session, and we'll see Michael again next month for verse 8 of Uḷḷadu Nāṛpadu.
That's also a very interesting verse.
Good.
Om Namo Bhagavate Sri Ramana Center.